matters that somebody has, dedicated themselves to affirming through this mantra or any mantra their own divine nature. You can use this mantra, you can use the Gayatri mantra, you can use, any mantra from any tradition. But if you're persistent and you're constantly reaffirming these divine energies within you, you're going to have a divine life. There's no question about it. So it doesn't matter so much what the specifics are. It matters that you're affirming your own spiritual nature. That's the thing that connects us all, that we all share that that quality. We all have that eternal soul within us, and whatever means, we need to come back to it, however the door opens. You could choose any one of these mantras, when you leave here today. I would love it if people felt inspired to add a practice. It doesn't matter which. It might even be something else, but to just start something with mantra practice, to just kind of like affirm your own beauty. It's a great thing. Any experiences or questions or insights so far? Well, one thing about the first one, those sounds, ring, they're odd. They're bija sounds or seed sounds from a certain tradition, and they're not familiar to us. Until I met the yogi who taught me this chant like 2 years ago, I had never heard the energy and things like that. I had never heard that done. I guess it's in the Gurmukhi language in the Sikh tradition, but it was new to me. So yeah, there's a difference in the language, and then there's also an energetic quality of it's a very earthy, kind of rooted, massive energy. When you get into it, did anybody have that sense of expansion? Did you get a sense of expansion from doing that first chant, the Ganesh mantra? Anybody get that?
Yes.
The way it's done traditionally, I'll show you this, and if you're feeling brave, you can check this out. They do this kind of extreme breathing practice when they do this mantra. So, and it's a way of just completely rewiring your circuitry. So you take a big breath in. The way they do it, they do like taco tongue. I can't do that. I don't have to. I'm not genetically predisposed. But they do that to warm the air. But you could use ujjayi breath. Still breathe in through your nose if you like it. And then you chant the mantra as long as you can, kind of string it all together until you completely run out of air. So they might, ring on and on and on, and you just roll with it. And in the more extreme forms of the practice, you don't stop until you either have like a vision and experience of the deity or you faint. But the way that I was taught, just as like a practice, you don't get to the point of fainting, but you do this like extended thing where you're like you don't really have time to think about anything else. The only thing to think about is this arc of this deity that you're kind of bringing forward, and it has a way of really the term samskaras, those sort of habitual pathways of thought that kind of keep us bound into our sort of limited existences. Chanting like that has a way of sort of busting those wide open and shifting things and sort of forming new channels. So that's a way of doing it. And chanting, mantra practice is in itself a form of pranayama, of breathing practice, however you do it. But there's more kind of extreme practices. And when you do it that way, I think you find it's easier to access that sense of massive expansion, and you kind of like crack through it that way. The way I taught it is a more sort of approachable way, where people can learn it. But there are other ways of practicing, I think, that you can emphasize that expansion even more. Because because by breathing that way, a quick inhalation and then like stretch out the exhalation for as long as possible, I know it does something to the energy field. It's very powerful.
That's very Tibetan. It has a very Tibetan feel when you hear Tibetan chanting.
Right, yeah.
It often sounds like that.
It's a kind of a shamanic practice. And there are those shamanic practices in Tibet, the Tibetan Bon tradition. It's one of the earlier forms of Buddhism. It's a shamanic form of Buddhism that Buddhists practices like that there. Any other insights, questions, experiences?
What is your recommendation for someone when those patterns start cracking open?
Do more mantra. You mean, so as a result of chanting, or just in life, it's just happening?
As a result of chanting, just emotions coming up, do they get released? How do they let change and transform changing the lives?
Well, if it's intense, it's good to have a teacher or a guide who can sort of like help. But you might look at what kinds of practices would serve the kind of changes that you're facing. So you might look at like, well, what are the areas and what are the sort of what are the principles that you're working with, and then sort of identify what days might resonate for you with those principles to help sort of align it. And I mean, with mantra practice, it's good to have guidance, and I'm offering these sort of just as a sort of an introduction, but then you might find as you're cultivating and practice more, to have connections with the studio or other people in the community who offer that kind of direct guidance to practice. And I know there's some shortage of that.
How do you feel about people who hear the harmony, that like, I always hear the third in all the mantras.
The third?
Like I just hear it and I want to sing it.
Right.
Do you encourage that, or do you feel it distracts? And what is your feeling about that? Like, I know as a kirtan singer, do you want us to repeat exactly as you say it, or if we hear that harmony, is it appropriate to sing it?
Well, I think it's one thing in kirtan, like if you got a group of people and a person or two is doing harmony, it's a nice compliment. It blends in. When you're chanting the mantra, it isn't about music at all.
Like when you're doing japa, you mean?
Yeah.
Yeah.
When you're doing mantra sadhana, mantra practice, like
right.
we're discussing here now, it's then I would say, it's not about like harmony or music in any way. It's just about.
Right. So kirtan, it's okay if you hear the third. If you hear harmony, do you think it's distracting for someone in the group to sing it, or do you think it benefits the group to hear the voice, the different voices?
I think it can benefit.
Okay.
I think it can benefit. I mean, the whole idea of kirtan is just through one means or another, like inspire people to chant. And the rest of it's just gravy. I mean, it doesn't matter what you do if you don't have. If you're participating, then you're achieved the purpose of it all.
Okay.
That's my feeling. Well, and you look at like, how many of you guys have been to kirtan? The kirtan movement started back in like the 5th century or something with these bands of devotees who were wandering around with drums and cymbals and just singing simple chants like Shri Ram, Jai Ram, Jai Jai Ram. And there was this movement towards, there was a movement away from exclusivity, in which basically just the priests were able to chant mantras. And it was a movement towards making it a folk practice. So take mantras into the hands of all of us. So you didn't have to be born like, into a certain caste and with being a certain gender to access these practices. So it's the accessibility. So to me, once accessing it is the point. You do what you want with it. Yeah. My big inspiration is to let people know that there's this wider world outside of just kirtan. Because kirtan's a beautiful thing, but it's even more beautiful when, like we were saying about like having sort of a root practice where you can dedicate some time every day and explore these mantras. Well, if you're doing that and then you come to the kirtan, then the kirtan takes on a whole new meaning because you've got connections with these mantras, you can work with them, and you've begun relationships with these archetypes in the form of the deity. So then when you hear these names come out in a kirtan, you're like, I know that principle. I know that mantra has a certain energy, a certain sort of feel to it. So you're familiar with it. So it only enhances the kirtan. And to me, these kind of practices, like especially like the ones we'll be getting into now, the Gayatri Mantra, the Mahamrityunjaya, these are potent, life-changing practices that to me is a whole nother league. Not to, make a hierarchy of it, but it's in a whole other league from kirtan. To me, like this is like a prescription medicine, and kirtan's over the counter. I mean, there is no such qualification, of course, but if you can approach these kind of practices with a daily, dedicated practice, then it's very potent. Anybody else? Next question. Is there a